I want you to join me for a crucial mental exercise. We're going to empty the map in your head.
What do you mean by empty it?
I mean, truly empty it. Forget every name, every flag, every modern context you associate with the Caribbean.
Okay, so we're stripping away 5 centuries of external labels and preconceptions.
Exactly. We're getting back to the raw landscape.
What remains is a pure landscape, then. A physical world defined only by its resources and its original inhabitants.
Perfect. Now listen closely. Imagine you are standing on a shore. You can hear the crashing of the sea, yes, but inland the air is dense.
Dense how?
It's heavy, with the sound of constant moving water springs that never dry, rivers carving through limestone, and the deep, hushed rustle of a forest so thick it just absorbs sound.
So this is a place whose identity is rooted in its ecology.
Untouched by any knowledge beyond its own system.
That is the essential starting point for this deep dive. Our mission today is a crucial intellectual exercise to understand the sophisticated foundations of the island later called Jamaica, focusing exclusively on the established indigenous world that existed long before the year 1494.
We are not here to discuss discovery. That word, it implies a vacuum, an emptiness. We are here to analyze an existing, functional civilization.
A fully formed world.
Yes, we're going to be talking about the people who were later grouped under the labels Arawaks, or Taíno, and how their meticulous strategic adaptation to a complex tropical island ecology allowed them not just to scrape by, but to truly thrive for centuries.
And this is where the central contradiction comes in, which our sources present as the anchor for our entire discussion.
What's that?
The people were labeled primitive by Europeans, yet their settlements were explicitly described by sources as not primitive. This demands that we immediately discard the baggage associated with those colonial labels.
So we have to set aside the words Arawak and Taíno almost, or at least the assumptions that come with them.
Oh, we must. We have to focus entirely on the documented evidence of their engineered competence and their mastery of the environment.
So we're examining master hydrologists, master builders, and master chemists who had already solved the fundamental challenges of stable human settlement.
And in one of the world's most demanding ecological zones, no less.
So let's begin where all great civilizations begin, with the definition of their home.
Let's start with the source's core definition, moving immediately to the name that defined their reality.
I like that. Let's call the first phase of this deep dive, naming the world, land of wood and water.
A perfect place to start.
When we approach the name Jamaica, the original name for this island, what strikes me immediately is its practicality.
It's very direct.
It's not a celebration of a war or a god, which you see so often in other foundation myths. It is purely descriptive of the terrain they inhabited. It's like a fundamental declaration of resources.
That practicality is the profound insight here. Our source details the common translation, land of wood and water. When a people name their home based on its 2 most fundamental life-sustaining resources, its ecological signature, it indicates a deeply practical, profound relationship with the environment.
It's not poetry, it's a user manual.
Exactly. It tells us that access to these materials dictated their entire cultural structure, their economy, their spirituality, everything.
I want to break this down because the name really acts as a geographic primer. Let's start with the first pillar, the wood.
Okay.
The source specifically mentions the presence of thick interior forests. That word, thick, it gives us so much to unpack. What does the sheer density of those forests reveal about the pre-1494 Taíno economy?
The term thick interior forests implies an incredible amount of biomass, biodiversity, and crucially, maturity. This wasn't just scrubland. This was a ready-made, sustainable factory.
A factory for what, though?
Well, for the Taíno communities, this forest was their architectural supply chain, their hardware store, and the literal foundation of their transport system. It provided the resources necessary to transition from, say, transient living to permanent strategic settlement.
But wait, if they were consistently extracting resources from it, what evidence do we have for sophistication in forestry management? I mean, a thick forest that remains thick over centuries isn't just a happy accident, is it?
No, absolutely not. It implies a rigorous, long-term sustainability model, a pure form of applied wood science. They needed deep knowledge to distinguish which species were best suited for which application.
So they weren't just clear-cutting.
Not at all. Think about structures. The ukayaks, the organized village centers, required strong, rot-resistant posts and beams to withstand tropical humidity and storms. They had to know which wood to fell and when.
When? Like what time of year?
Perhaps. It could be based on lunar cycles or specific growth patterns to ensure maximum durability. This is advanced knowledge.
And if we look ahead to the technology section of our sources, we know they were masters of canoe travel. That technology is entirely reliant on wood.
Completely.
So what specific properties would they have been seeking from those thick interior forests to build, ocean-going vessels?
For boat building, they needed the Holy Trinity: buoyancy, stability, and rot resistance. They would likely seek massive tree trunks, often of specific hardwoods, large enough to be hollowed out into a single, seamless hull.
A single piece of wood?
A single piece! The fact that they could successfully build vessels capable of connecting wider Caribbean networks proves they weren't just chopping trees, they were engaging in a selective, sustainable process of material engineering.
They must have had a system.
They had to ensure the forest regenerated fast enough to supply successive generations of builders. This is long-term thinking.
So the wood of Jamaica defines their construction, their crafts, their cooking, which needs fuel, and their regional reach. It's the material foundation of their society.
Exactly. And the management of that wood resource connects directly to the need for inland transport, which brings us perfectly to the second pillar of the name, water.
Right. The source doesn't just say water. It gives us a highly detailed, specific breakdown. Constant springs, rivers, and wetlands.
And that phrasing is so important.
That term, constant springs, is extremely powerful in a tropical climate that can be prone to seasonal shifts.
It speaks to stability and permanence. A constant spring is a perennial source of fresh, clean water, meaning they had year-round, reliable water security.
Which in the tropics, that's everything.
Water access dictates life. A reliable spring is the ideal geographic anchor point, confirming the inherently strategic nature of their settlement locations. They didn't settle randomly. They settled where the constant water was.
And then the rivers are the connecting arteries.
Yes.
They serve not just for drinking and agriculture, but for transport, especially when connecting the coastal settlements where they fished to those dense interior forests where they sourced their wood. The river becomes the supply chain.
And that requires a certain level of hydraulic engineering knowledge. They would have needed to understand the river's flood cycles, how to maximize water usage for irrigation without depleting downstream sources, and how to safely navigate them with their canoes.
So their daily life would be built around what the source calls the river rhythm.
Yes, which we'll get into. But it's all dictated by their intimate knowledge of these hydrological features.
Okay, so we have springs for stability, rivers for transport. Let's not skip over the wetlands. Often, history portrays wetlands as, barriers or dangerous swamps.
Unusable land, basically.
Right. But what does the inclusion of wetlands in Jamaica's self-definition tell us about the Taíno relationship with water?
It tells us they were master ecologists. In the Taíno context, a wetland isn't a swamp to be drained. It's a highly productive, complex ecosystem, rich in fish, fowl, and specialized plants.
So it's a resource.
It's a resource to be managed, not an obstacle to be conquered. Utilizing wetlands successfully requires expert knowledge, how to navigate them, how to extract resources sustainably, and how to use them as natural buffers against coastal erosion or storm surge. It is a sign of immense environmental sophistication.
So if we zoom out, the name Jamaica, land of wood and water, is more than a label.
Much more.
It's an indigenous definition of resources and potential codified into identity. It is an ecological contract.
It is a profound declaration that they understood their home environment on an intimate, functional level. They defined themselves by their reliable resources, confirming that they had established a stable, resource-rich environment capable of supporting a long-term, complex culture.
And this is our first big proof point.
It's the first proof point that their existence was, as the source states, adapted, strategic, and stable.
This contrast between the perceived land and the reality of a complex, managed ecosystem, thick forests, constant springs, controlled rivers, and utilized wetlands, that's the key insight from this first part of our dive.
I agree.
They didn't just passively occupy the land, they actively integrated their survival into its defining features.
And that leads us logically to how they organize their daily lives to leverage these resources. If the island is the canvas, the rhythms are the paint strokes that define their society.
Okay, so let's move into that second segment. We need to confirm the temporal anchor. The source states, long before any European flag touched the shore, Jamaica was an indigenous world.
That phrase, indigenous world, is so powerful.
Why? What does it signal to you?
It signals a cultural cohesion far beyond a temporary gathering of tribes. It means a shared set of customs, systems of governance, knowledge transfer mechanisms, and a unified cosmology. The term world suggests that their cultural depth and self-governance were fully established and functioning independently.
And critically, this world was not isolated. Our source explicitly states these were communities connected to wider Caribbean networks.
Yes, and this immediately refutes the myth of the isolated, static island population. It's a game changer for how we view them.
So what's the scale we're talking about here? Wider Caribbean network sounds big.
It is. It implies regular, institutionalized communication and movement across vast stretches of open water. This connection validates their status not as local settlers, but as active, sophisticated regional players participating in a broader maritime political economy.
So what are the implications of those networks being so robust? I mean, beyond simple trade, how would this have shaped Jamaica's culture?
It means they were not stagnant. They were constantly receiving and exporting knowledge.
Like what kind of knowledge?
Advancements in cassava processing, which we'll discuss later, or in agricultural techniques like the Conuco system of mounded farming. These ideas would diffuse across the archipelago. This sharing of technology reduces risk for everyone.
It's like an open source system for survival.
That's a fantastic analogy. And think about diplomacy and security. Being part of a regional network suggests treaties, alliances, and established protocols for interaction.
So shared ceremonial practices, maybe? Or agreements about resource boundaries?
Exactly. That requires immense political sophistication among the caciques, the chiefs. They weren't just village elders, they were international diplomats.
And none of this happens without the technology to make it possible.
The mastery of canoe travel is the absolute prerequisite for these networks. The existence of the network confirms that they had solved the problem of open water navigation.
And given what we just discussed about Jamaica, it must have been a key location.
It seems very likely. Jamaica, with its abundant wood and fresh water, was likely a crucial hub or stopping point in these networks, a strategic port of call for other island communities. They would have been major logistical actors in the region.
Okay, so if we zoom in now from that big regional network to daily life, the source gives us an organizational roadmap.
It does.
It tells us they were living by the rhythms of sea, river, farming, and ceremony. This feels like their societal operating system, their organizational philosophy.
This framework is critical because it shows a balanced, integrated approach to survival. They recognize that sustained success requires coordination across environmental and spiritual domains. It's holistic.
So let's drill down into each of these four foundational elements.
Let's do.
We have to begin with the sea rhythm. For an island society, this is non-negotiable. The sea is both a massive food resource and a constant source of threat if it's misunderstood.
The sea rhythm required continuous, generations deep observation. It's not something you learn in a year. They had to track the tides, understand the seasonal shifts of currents, and predict weather patterns.
Which is especially critical in a hurricane-prone zone.
Absolutely. Ignoring the sea rhythm means resource depletion, or worse, death by storm. It's applied meteorology and oceanography.
And it speaks to specific settlement choices. Coastal communities would be strategically placed for easy access to the water.
Right, perhaps near protected harbors or inlets that offered natural defenses against rough seas, while also being adjacent to rich fishing grounds, reefs, estuaries, or deep water shelves.
It also must have dictated the timing of their activities.
Of course. It dictated the timing of fishing expeditions. They needed to know when specific fish were spawning or migrating. This led to the development of sophisticated fishing technologies.
Such as
Specialized nets, weirs, which are traps built into streams or coastal areas, and hook designs tailored to the local marine life. This is systematic exploitation, but it has to be balanced by an implicit need for conservation to sustain the rhythm long term.
Okay, so that's the sea. Moving inland, we have the river rhythm. Given Jamaica's defining feature of constant springs, rivers, and wetlands, this rhythm governs the domestic sphere and agriculture.
The river rhythm is about freshwater security, sanitation, and hydraulic management. They needed to manage the flow for drinking water, for irrigation of their critical cassava plots, and for disposal of waste in a sanitary manner.
So that implies some level of infrastructure.
It does. It implies the construction of specific pathways or perhaps small dams or diversions to ensure constant, controlled access to water.
And if we connect this back to the wood we mentioned earlier, the rivers are also the highways.
They are. They allowed the transport of heavy materials, those felled trees, from the interior to the coast where they might be crafted into canoes or used for larger coastal structures.
So the river rhythm is what integrates the entire island's economy.
It ties the coastal fishermen and the interior farmers into a single system. The river provides the continuity and the logistical backbone necessary to keep the two zones communicating and exchanging goods.
Next up, we arrive at the farming rhythm. This feels like the fundamental engine of societal stability, directly linked to their designation as skilled farmers.
It is the engine. The farming rhythm is the agricultural calendar necessary for sustained food production, particularly the labor-intensive cassava cultivation. This rhythm is purely technical, demanding precision in timing, crop rotation, and soil management.
And it's non-negotiable.
Completely. Failure here means famine.
This rhythm also demands intense coordinated labor. Planting, weeding, harvesting, and crucially, processing the cassava are all multi-person, multi-stage activities that must be executed on schedule.
And this signifies a deep understanding of tropical agroecology. They relied on specific knowledge of rainfall patterns and soil depletion, rather than the temperature signals used in temperate zones.
The source mentions canucos.
Yes, their farming system, which utilizes features like the canucos, those are raised agricultural mounds, shows a clear technological investment designed to maximize yield and prevent soil erosion and waterlogging. The rhythm is proof of their long-term commitment to the land.
Okay, so we have sea, river, and farming. Finally, we have the ceremony rhythm. This is the least tangible, but you could argue it's the most important rhythm because it provides the social cohesion for the other three to work.
I would absolutely make that argument. Ceremony provides structure, justification, and spiritual focus. It's the communal glue.
And these ceremonies weren't separate from daily life, were they?
Not at all. They were inextricably linked to the practical rhythms, planting rituals, rites of passage for navigators, or Thanksgivings after a successful hunt or harvest. It validates the social contract that keeps everyone working together.
And the ceremony rhythm, I assume, dictates the political structure led by the cacique.
Yes. These leaders weren't just figureheads. They were the organizers, the decision-makers who interpreted the rhythm when to plan, when to fish, when to trade, and when to conduct collective labor. They were the conductors of this societal orchestra.
So, without the ceremony rhythm, the knowledge transfer breaks down.
It completely breaks down. The complex chemical process of detoxifying cassava, the specific astronomical navigation required for canoe travel, this specialized knowledge is passed down and reinforced through ritual and ceremony. It ensures the longevity of their engineered solutions.
So what's the big implication when we look at these four rhythms as a complete system?
They define resilience. This is a highly diversified, multifaceted approach to survival. If the sea rhythm fails due to a hurricane, they have stored cassava from the farming rhythm.
And if the river rhythm slows due to drought, the sea rhythm can compensate for protein.
Precisely. This integrated, holistic view is the definitive hallmark of a complex, enduring, and ultimately stable civilization. They were engineered for resilience.
Let's now move firmly into the territory of tangible proof. We need to confront that initial label again. The people Europeans later labeled Arawaks or Taíno, and replace it with the source's positive declaration. They were skilled farmers and builders.
This is where we move from theory to applied science. The key concept here is engineered competence. They weren't just surviving, they were building sophisticated, repeatable systems that solved complex problems systematically.
We'll start with what the source specifically highlights as a key skill, and what I believe is one of the most astonishing examples of indigenous intelligence: cassava cultivation.
It's a perfect example.
So why is the successful farming of this one root vegetable such profound proof of deep technological mastery?
Because cassava, or yucca, particularly the bitter variety common in the Caribbean, is nature's double-edged sword. It is a profoundly high-yield, drought-resistant staple.
Meaning it provides maximum caloric return for minimum environmental input. A superfood.
A superfood with a deadly catch. The bitter variety contains cyanogenic glucosides. In layman's terms, that's natural cyanide.
So successful cultivation isn't just knowing how to plant. It's knowing how to disarm a poison factory safely and efficiently enough to feed an entire population.
You've hit it exactly. That is pure chemical engineering applied to food security.
And the process required multiple, specific technological steps. This wasn't guesswork, right?
This was a standardized industrial procedure developed centuries ago. First, as we mentioned, the farmers needed to create conucos, those raised mounds, to ensure the best growing conditions.
Let's go a bit deeper on the conucos. Why are they so important? I mean, doesn't the root just grow in the ground?
The conuco system is an agricultural engineering solution. By creating large, often circular raised beds, they ensured optimal soil drainage, preventing the root from rotting on heavy tropical rains and maximizing aeration.
So it's a water management system for the soil.
Yes, and more. They also packed the mounds with organic material and ash, turning poor island soil into high-fertility plots. It shows specialized land management designed to maximize yield permanence over many, many seasons.
Okay, so the planting is strategic. But the real genius, the chemical mastery, happens after the harvest. Walk us through the processing implied by the term skilled farmers.
Once harvested, the toxic root must first be grated into a pulp.
With what? They didn't have metal graters.
No, they used specialized grating boards, sometimes embedded with sharp stones or chips of shell, which showcases their sophisticated craft knowledge. The mash is then ready for the critical step: detoxification through pressing.
And this is where the sebican comes in, a piece of physics made from woven fiber. For our listener, can you detail the mechanics of the sebican?
The sebican is a woven, elongated, flexible tube, often hung from a strong roof beam. It's a piece of pure mechanical genius.
So it looks like a long sock or sleeve.
A very strong one. The grated cassava mash is stuffed inside. A heavy lever or log is then inserted into the bottom loop of the sebican, and weight is applied, pulling the tube downwards and stretching it.
By stretching the tube, the fibers constrict the contents, right? It gets narrower as it gets longer.
Exactly. The stretching motion creates immense hydrostatic pressure on the contents, squeezing out the poisonous liquid juice. This is a highly efficient, labor-saving device that physically extracts the cyanide-containing liquid.
They understood that the poison was water-soluble.
They had to. And they engineered a tool to systematically remove that water. Only once the pulp is pressed dry and often roasted on a flat griddle called the burin to drive off any remaining volatile compounds does it become cassava bread is safe, shelf-stable flour.
It's an astonishing piece of insight that they essentially created a portable, shelf-stable detoxified flour centuries before industrialized food processing.
You're talking about chemistry and physics applied directly to the problem of caloric consistency. This skill alone proves a deep level of mastery that supports their claim of stability.
Without that detoxification process, that massive caloric base is inaccessible.
Correct. The cassava technology is the technological foundation upon which Jamaica's population density and permanence were built.
Now let's shift from the foundation of the home to the infrastructure that connected their world. We need to look at infrastructure and travel, starting with fishing technologies. Again, the source uses the plural, technologies.
The use of the plural implies systematic, diverse, and efficient methods for resource extraction tailored to different aquatic environments. It means they weren't just using single hooks and lines.
We're talking about a whole toolkit.
We're talking about designed systems. Deep water lines for larger fish, highly specialized nets woven from durable fibers, and coastal traps or weirs placed strategically in estuaries or river mouths to capture fish migrating with the tides.
And the necessary mastery of the materials, again, the fibers for the nets and the wood for the weirs, must withstand salt water and constant use.
This is constant material science development. They're always refining their tools.
And it speaks to conservation, as you said before.
It has to. Effective fishing technologies require an underlying philosophy of sustainability. Overfishing would collapse the sea rhythm and destabilize the entire system. The ability to rely on marine protein consistently is a direct result of these established technologies.
Which flows perfectly into canoe travel.
Yeah.
The technology of outreach, the critical link to those wider Caribbean networks. This seems like the pinnacle of their engineering.
It absolutely is. This required mastery on 3 distinct challenging levels: material selection, construction engineering, and celestial navigation.
Let's start with the material selection. They needed a tree from that thick interior forest that was massive, but also lightweight and durable.
Selection was paramount. Once the perfect trunk was chosen, often requiring a huge communal effort to fell and move, the construction began.
They hollow it out.
They used a combination of controlled burning, which hardened the interior wood and made scooping easier, and specialized stone adzes for shaping and finishing. These canoes were not rough-hewn logs.
No, they were sophisticated, large-capacity vessels.
Sometimes capable of carrying dozens of people and tons of cargo. This required stability analysis and hydrodynamics knowledge, even if it wasn't written down in a textbook.
And the navigation. Crossing the open Caribbean. That requires far more than just pointing the bow toward the next island you can see.
It requires applied astronomy. They needed to understand the rising and setting points of specific stars to maintain a bearing at night. They also relied on profound sensory knowledge.
Like what?
Reading the wind patterns, interpreting the wave action that rebounded off distant islands, and tracking bird flight paths. It is an intricate, non-instrumental science that confirms their status as highly skilled actors on the high seas.
The very fact that the networks existed and were sustained proves the technological prowess of their canoes.
Oh.
Jamaica wasn't isolated. It was a node in a functioning regional economic and political web.
Sustained by these ingenious boats. And this technological competence extends directly into the seemingly mundane aspects of daily living, the domestic crafts that form the bedrock of stability.
Right, things like pottery for storing water and processed cassava, or weaving for clothes and nets.
These small technologies are what allow a community to manage resources effectively day to day.
And the source gives a specific shout out to one of those crafts, the hammock tradition. It mentions it as often associated with Taíno lifeways. Why dedicate attention to a simple resting place?
Because the hammock is arguably the most brilliant piece of tropical architectural adaptation ever engineered. It is not a luxury item. It is a superior piece of technological design built specifically to solve the endemic problems of tropical island living.
Okay, let's define those problems. If you were a contemporary European settler sleeping on the ground or on straw in a wooden building in the tropics, what are the threats?
You face immediate and severe threats. First, dampness and cold. The ground in an ecology defined by constant springs and wetlands is inherently damp, leading to discomfort, chill, and sickness.
The hammock immediately elevates you.
Immediately. Second, pests and disease vectors. Sleeping on the ground exposes you directly to insects, snakes, scorpions, and disease-carrying ticks. The hammock creates a secure, elevated microenvironment, separating the human from the immediate threat zone.
And third, there's ventilation. In a hot, humid climate, lying on a solid surface leads to overheating and sweating.
But the woven structure of the hammock allows air to circulate freely 360 degrees around the body, maximizing cooling efficiency. It's natural air conditioning.
And finally, it's portable.
Exactly. Unlike a static bed, the hammock is lightweight, easily deployed, and fits perfectly into the life of a civilization that relied on canoe travel and regional trade. It is the perfect piece of mobile architecture.
So it's a technological win because it is engineered for the precise constraints of the environment.
It leverages the Taíno mastery of weaving and fibers, a domestic craft, to solve complex environmental health problems. The hammock is irrefutable proof of strategic design in action, contradicting any notion of primitivism.
When you contrast that with contemporary European sleeping arrangements, often straw mattresses teeming with vermin or cold, damp stone floors.
The Taíno engineering solution is demonstrably superior for the ecology of Jamaica. They optimize their domestic life for comfort and hygiene through ingenious design.
We have spent this entire deep dive systematically detailing the components, the name, the rhythms, and the technologies. Now, in this final section, we need to synthesize this information to deliver the ultimate rebuttal to the colonial narrative.
This is where it all comes together.
The source makes that explicit declaration. Their settlement was not primitive.
And the source doesn't just stop at a negation. It provides the positive definition that defines their success. Their civilization was adapted, strategic, and stable. These three words encapsulate the entirety of our findings.
So we have to prove how every previous detail supports these concepts. Let's start with adapted. To be adapted implies a dynamic, flexible mastery over the local materials and environment.
Adaptation meant successfully minimizing the inherent risks of a tropical island. Hurricanes, humidity, pests, drought, while maximizing the benefits, constant water, thick wood, and rich marine life.
The ability to process toxic cassava into a reliable staple is the ultimate example of food adaptation.
Absolutely. They took a problematic, high-risk resource and engineered a high-reward solution.
And the technologies were bespoke for the environment. The hammock is adapted architecture designed specifically for humidity and pests. The canoe system is adapted soil management to prevent erosion and maximize tropical yield.
They didn't impose a foreign model of living on the landscape. They engineered a perfectly customized one from the ground up to fit Jamaica.
So adaptation is a dialogue with the ecology.
A perfect way to put it. They operated within the constraints defined by the four rhythms: sea, river, farming, ceremony. They engineered their systems to harmonize with nature, demonstrating a deep respect for the environment's capacity rather than trying to overpower it.
Okay, that's adapted. Next, we move to strategic. This implies intentionality, forethought, and long-term planning, which is the complete opposite of accidental existence.
Strategic applies to every level of their society. Settlement placement was strategic, always near those constant springs for water security, and positioned to manage access between the coast and the interior forest.
And resource management was strategic. Sustainable harvesting of wood and the necessary rotation cycles in their canucos.
Correct.
But I want to challenge that point slightly. Tropical islands are susceptible to massive environmental shocks, hurricanes, severe droughts. If they were so strategic and successful, what evidence do we have that their systems could handle major environmental catastrophe?
That's a great question. And the evidence lies in their material culture and their political organization. Strategic planning for shocks requires buffers.
Buffers.
Yes. The ability to create cazabe, that shelf-stable cassava bread, means they had built-in food reserves capable of sustaining the population during a harvest failure or a period of recovery after a storm. That's a strategic buffer.
And the networks.
Furthermore, their participation in the wider Caribbean networks was strategic. It meant that in the event of a local disaster, there was a regional diplomatic and trade infrastructure to potentially call upon for assistance. Strategy wasn't just about daily efficiency. It was about generational resilience.
That makes perfect sense. Strategy also involves labor organization. The farming rhythm required coordinated communal effort.
Yes, the caciques must have strategically managed the population, organizing specialized labor weavers, canoe builders, farmers, fishers, to ensure all four rhythms were maintained efficiently. This coordination demands highly evolved political and social systems.
So they were planning decades, if not centuries, into the future.
They had to be. They invested immense labor into infrastructure, like the canucos and the permanent canoe fleet that paid dividends for generations. That is the definition of strategic thinking.
And the culmination of adaptation and strategy is stable. This is the ultimate proof point. A long-lasting, enduring society that achieved equilibrium with its environment.
Stability is the outcome of successful engineering. It means that the interlocking systems, the agricultural, technological, and political systems, were robust enough to withstand both internal pressures and external shocks. They reached a sustainable carrying capacity with the island's resources.
The very fact that they had an established indigenous world and existed long before any European flag touched the shore is the empirical proof of their stability.
It is. Their settlements were persistent, resilient, and enduring, not temporary camps.
So the final synthesis of our source material confirms this. The ultimate achievement of this culture was that their settlements were literally built to thrive in a tropical island ecology.
They solved the foundational problems of food, water, housing, and mobility in a challenging environment.
Let's quickly review the specific evidence that proves this thriving. The chemical sophistication to detoxify bitter cassava.
The engineered efficiency of the hammock to combat dampness and pests.
The constant utilization of fresh water indicated by the name Jamaica itself.
And the sophisticated material science of the thick forests used for massive, ocean-worthy canoes.
All these facts converge. They weren't fighting the environment.
They were collaborating with it. They leveraged technology and strategy to secure long-term success, defining their world through their resources.
And this brings us back to you, the listener. The aha moment here is powerful. Understanding Jamaica before 1494 transforms the historical narrative from one of a discovered empty space to a story of established, meticulously engineered living.
The knowledge extracted proves they were master ecologists, strategic builders, and ingenious chemists.
Their story is a powerful testament to indigenous intelligence.
They defined their world and solved the problems of living in their specific environment centuries before any external influence arrived, utilizing only their own resources and their own genius.
We have completed a remarkable deep dive, peeling back the layers to find the functional, vibrant civilization of Jamaica. We've seen the sophistication encoded in their very name, that practical ecological map of wood and water.
We've established the depth of their Caribbean networks, confirming their role as regional, diplomatic, and logistical actors.
And we've analyzed the evidence of engineered resilience in their farming technologies and domestic crafts, from the cebican to the genius of the hammock.
The ultimate takeaway is that the people Europeans later labeled Taíno built a world that was adapted, strategic, and stable. A world specifically engineered to thrive in the demanding yet abundant tropical ecology of Jamaica.
But our sources, while definitive, they only provide the structural blueprint. They show us the mechanism.
So we have one final provocative thought for you to carry forward, something to mull over long after this deep dive concludes.
We've seen that stability was defined by the four crucial rhythms: sea, river, farming, and ceremony. If their entire survival system was based on this systemic management, what happens when those rhythms are forgotten or destroyed?
The sources show us what thriving looked like, based on the knowledge embedded in those rhythms. The provocative thought is this: what could modern technologically advanced society, grappling with climate instability, resource scarcity, and mass deforestation, still learn from a civilization that achieves such strategic, stable adaptation to a specific ecology?
When our modern systems fail, we look for high-tech fixes. But when those four rhythms, the ancient knowledge of constant springs, the sustainable harvesting of thick forests, the necessary social cohesion of ceremony were lost, what specific, practical, life-sustaining wisdom about managing a tropical environment did humanity lose forever?
That intimate, localized knowledge of wood and water, that is the intelligence that truly defines permanence. We encourage you to keep questioning the narratives of history and the definitions of success.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Jamaica before Europe. We hope this has provided you with a truly deep, informed understanding of their brilliance.
We invite you to continue this journey of discovery with us.
We'll meet you in the next chapter of History and Knowledge.